No history books will tell you what you're about to hear, yet this history is worth knowing. It's our story, we can learn from it, get inspiration from it, and hopefully plan our future based on it. Board member and President Emeritus Derrick Strobl combines his skills as a teacher, attorney, and humanist to bring us the inspiring story of secular activism in Ohio from 1800 to 1950. Let's welcome Derrick.
Great, well thank you very much, Jeff, and thank you to everybody who's come to hear more about the things that we've discovered about humanist history here in Central Ohio. And since Jamie's been kind enough to record our program today, I'd like to ask you to hold comments and questions until the end. And our purpose today is for you to come away from here saying, wow, they did that, what could we do? Or on the other hand, you might come away saying, oh, they did that, what could we do instead? But either way, it's a good opportunity for us to reflect on our past as humanists here in Central Ohio and to figure out what we're going to do about our future. Our discoveries began when I located a small footnote mentioning a Columbus Rationalist society. And with the help of former board member and former history teacher Jerome Schweiker, we were able to locate a lot of primary source materials that tell about what kinds of things went on in Ohio between 1800 and 1950. And so we'll be able, those are things that are coming from articles that were in the newspaper and letters to the editor and other sources. So we'll be exploring things like this. What famous people came to Columbus as guest speakers and what did they accomplish? How did a bishop end up getting tried for heresy? What local rationalist ran for president? And what did the Columbus Rationalist Society do? So first I'll answer some of those questions about our history, and then I have questions that I'd like for us to discuss about our present and our future. So we have many things in common with these secular activists from years ago, even if they didn't call themselves humanists. Some may have called themselves free thinkers or agnostics or atheists or skeptics or even rationalists. But like us, they valued their freedom of thought and freedom to investigate claims and to check evidence. To find out what's true, they checked the facts, logic, and clarity of arguments. And to find out what was good, they examined human experience. They didn't believe in the supernatural, but instead they cared about making life better here and now for themselves and others, and they made a range of contributions. So, the story of secular activism here in Central Ohio is one of courageous and honest people combating error of opinion and trying to make a more compassionate, reasonable, and just society. And we've been hearing a lot about the so-called new atheists, but although we might be new to some people, we're not new. We've been around for a very long time. And the struggle for civil rights and religious freedom and church-state separation have been with us since colonial days here in Franklin County. So, what was free thought like when the Europeans arrived? In the early 1800s, Ohio law allowed people to be atheists and to have the religion of their choice. However, courts were still debating whether they could take testimony from people who didn't believe. And they tried making many fine distinctions about whether somebody believed in consequences from an afterlife, or whether they believed in God, or whether they believed in consequences here on earth. But for some reason, they had trouble with the idea that maybe they could just trust people to give testimony under penalties of perjury. And you'll know that although the courts were debating that 100 years or 150 years ago, some of those questions and prejudices are still common today. Those questions of whether we can trust people who aren't believers. So, still, along with those difficulties, we had people who were willing to do something about the problems. You may know that Susan B. Anthony was a freethinker, but you may not know that in 1888, Susan B. Anthony came to speak to the General Assembly of Ohio to talk about women's suffrage. And getting the vote took the courage of freethinkers like her who were willing to stand up for what was right way before it was popular. Also, atheist Emma Goldman came to Columbus in 1911 to talk about workers' rights. And the Columbus Evening Dispatch reported that the archpriestess of anarchy is coming. And yes, the Dispatch reported that Emma Goldman, who has more or less terrified social conventions by her doctrines of individual freedom, has been kept from speaking in Columbus several times by the police. So when she arrived in January of 1911, the county commissioner barred her from speaking in Memorial Hall. Memorial Hall is that big building downtown that used to be the COSI building for a while. But anyway, she moved her audience to the Red Lion Inn, where she said, "I am glad to know that the commissioners and county Columbus authorities have denied me the right of speaking in Memorial Hall. It was built by laws which shot down working men when only asking for their rights. I'm glad to know that there are enough men and women, men in this convention with backbone to follow me here and to listen to me. We express this hope that justice will ultimately triumph. You are fighting the battle for human rights against corporation greed and judicial arrogance. Keep fighting, right will prevail." And if you've been keeping up on Occupy Wall Street, you know that some of these issues are, again, still with us today. Agnostic Clarence Darrow was one of Ohio's most famous attorneys. And in 1928, Darrow came to Columbus, and he did get to speak in Columbus's Memorial Hall. He had a debate with Rabbi Tarshish about whether man was a machine or whether we had a soul, and we're products of are we products of natural causes. And Memorial Hall ended up being filled so much that they had to turn some people away. And then Darrow said during his presentation, "Where in the dickens is this soul? When it gets separated from the body, is it roosting in the trees? When it goes off to space, where does it go? Was there a soul in the original cell from which I came? Where is heaven? If I were going to believe in a soul, I would want something just a tiny bit to base it on." End quote. So what do you get if you bring together a rabbi, a Protestant, a Catholic, and an agnostic? If the agnostic is Clarence Darrow, you might get a crowd of 4,200 people and front page news. Now, some of you know that often when there are public discussions of religious and moral issues, representatives from various religions get asked for their opinions, but humanists don't always get included. This was not always the case, and you can see right here, we have Rabbi Tarshish and Bishop Protestant Hughes, Clarence Darrow, and Judge McGurty giving their opinions on why they believed or didn't believe in their religion. And that was on the front page of the Ohio State Journal on March 13th, 1929. So this wasn't, what they did was have an interfaith discussion, one of the first really big ones that I know of, and they were aiming to promote understanding of different religious points of view and also aiming to reduce prejudice. So Darrow gave his endorsements to inquiry, reason, science, and things founded upon fact. And Darrow explained, "I know the limitations of human reason, but there is no other lamp." I love that quote. "I know the limitations of human reason, but there is no other lamp." All right, religion is great because religion makes heretics. And here we have Bishop William Montgomery Brown, the Episcopal bishop from Galion, Ohio. Bishop Brown spent most of his life as a very devoted Orthodox Christian. He didn't really even give much thought to Christianity being wrong or find out about other points of view. And when he was going through seminary, he said, "I just tried to find out how to defend Christianity." And that's exactly what he did through most of his career. He built many churches and rose through the ranks in the church. Then, after an intense struggle over how to incorporate more African Americans into the Episcopal Church, Bishop Brown got sick, and he spent some time recovering. But while he was recovering, he read Darwin and Marx. Let's just say Bishop Brown's ideas changed radically. And Bishop Brown lost his fundamentalist faith, thoroughly rejected superstition, or supernaturalism, I should say. He no longer believed in God. He no longer thought that Jesus was a real person. He no longer believed in anything supernatural, didn't believe in an afterlife. And he just considered the stories in the Bible to be maybe meaningful stories, but not something that was a source of truth about the world. He liked religion because of its symbols that he compared to Santa Claus and Uncle Sam. And he published a book with this in the title, Banish the Gods from the Skies and the Capitalists from the Earth. So that didn't go over well with the other bishops. Brown was put through the first American ecclesiastical heresy trial in 1924. And yet, Brown still very much loved the church. He loved Christianity, and he saw himself as being the one attempting to modernize things. He envisioned a church where people of all different faith backgrounds could come together and search for truth that was based on science. So since he still wanted to be part of the church and loved it, he tried redefining many common terms that were used, such as God. He defined to be just reality and truth, not something from another world. And he tried to use the language of the church to go on being a Christian. His theory, when he went through the heresy trial, was that since the other bishops no longer took everything in the Bible and the creeds literally, he shouldn't have to take any of it literally. But that didn't go over very well, and they convicted him of heresy. Then, I went to Trinity Cathedral in Cleveland to see where he was tried for heresy. And it's hard to see, but right here on the door are two signs that say, "All are welcome here." So I'd like to think that maybe things have changed a little bit. And we did go in, and inside I met a woman there who had a very pained look on her face when I told her that we had come there because of the heresy trial many years ago. And she did invite us to stay for to see the kids do their Christmas pageant. So Bishop Brown's house is a preserved historical site now in Galion, Ohio. It's preserved by the Galion Historical Society, and it is available for tours. So the moral of that story is that people can change. In Columbus, we had somebody who was very much like Robert G. Ingersoll, and his name was Olin J. Ross. Olin Ross lived near, one of the places he lived anyway, was near Goodale Park at 140 Buttles Avenue. There's a picture of the house. And he also had his law office on High Street. So, like Ingersoll, Ross was an attorney, and he was a very popular public speaker. He was called the Demosthenes of the American bar. Ross entered the presidential campaigns as a Republican and a Prohibitionist. And you can see here that it says he spent $84 trying to get the GOP nomination. Back in the days, things have changed. Let's see. So he ran as a Republican and a Prohibitionist, favoring church-state separation and opposing regulation of business. He was also a strong supporter of railroads, and he wrote a book called The Iron Horse. Ross was a devoted rationalist, but he was also known for giving the church a fair hearing. But most importantly, Ross founded the Columbus Rationalist Society in 1914. And the rationalists derived their conclusions from reason, not revelation. They made rational powers the ultimate test of truth. Here is a description of the organization from the 1916 president, O.C. Weatherby. The Rationalist Society aimed to promote scientific inquiry, freedom of thought, to oppose superstition and intolerance, to provide an open forum for free discussion, and to secure speakers upon philosophical and sociological subjects. The Society declared for the following principles: freedom of thought, speech, press, assembly, science, art, education, literature, and religion. So, with those principles in mind, let's take a look at some of the things that the Rationalist Society did. And first, I'd like to start with their involvement in some of the issues of their day, and some of these issues are still with us today. In 1918, the Presbyterian Church was trying to force people to honor their Sabbath and keep it holy by blocking all Sunday entertainment. The Rationalists compared the Sunday laws to something from the Puritans. They said that Presbyterians were bringing us back to the intolerance of the Scarlet Letter days. And the Presbyterians accused rationalism of being the philosophy ruling Germany and causing World War I. So I suppose accusations like that sound familiar. On another occasion in 1917, the Rationalists defended the right to do gardening on Sunday because churches were trying to make Sunday gardening illegal. Also in 1917, the Rationalists criticized undertakers for the high cost of funerals. So life is just a phase, you'll get over it, right? Then, typically their meetings would be very long. They were open to the public, sometimes religious people would come, they could have multiple guest speakers at their meeting, and sometimes it would go on for hours and hours. They would discuss a lot of different issues, and often they would arrive at resolutions. In one 1917 meeting, the Rationalists discussed taxing churches, gardening on Sunday, and whether Jesus was a real person or a myth. It's quite a bit to cover in one meeting, but they apparently tackled it and made their conclusions public. So the Rationalists also resisted several movements to use public schools, school time, and school funds for religious indoctrination. In the 1920s, an organization of Christian fundamentalists called the KKK was at its peak. And the Klan tried to get Bible reading in public school. They wanted students to read 10 Bible verses each day and memorize the 10 Commandments. But the Rationalists helped keep the schools free of the Bible and the 10 Commandments. And here's a newspaper article about what they had to say. The one says that the Rationalists hid the Bible in the schools. And that one is from 1927. So they actually had to do this on more than 1 year. Okay. In 1924, people wanted to get release time for students from the Northwood and Indianola schools so that students could be sent to churches for an hour each week for religious indoctrination. And the Rationalists criticized the idea of having release time. In 1929, after a meeting of the Columbus Rationalist Society, the Rationalists resolved that public school teachers should not be required to turn in a reference from a pastor in order to be hired as a public school teacher in Columbus Public Schools. Now, vouchers may seem like something new, but even as early as 1935, churches were trying to take money from public schools. So as the headline says, the Rationalists fight school aid, church school aid. There were also issues at the college level. In 1919, the Rationalists blocked having a school of religion at The Ohio State University. The Rationalists said that it would, quote, compel both friend and foe of this religion to support it, and the state to lend its power and prestige to it. It is a wedge to split the eternal policy of the nation for the eternal separation of church and state. The Rationalists claimed that it was against the equal rights of all citizens, and they called proponents of the school enemies of the Republic and its institutions. Now, those church-state separation issues are probably not too controversial among humanists. Now I come to the part that might generate a little bit more excitement. This is the part where our Rationalists worked on combating error of opinion. The Rationalists let the public know their thoughts about religious claims and religious assumptions. they acted with honesty and courage. However, we need to see what the rationalists did and ask whether the things they did were rational. In 1915, we have this headline: Bible is declared devoid of reason. And the subtitle says, speaker asserts holy writings are tissues of fabrications and superstitions. Now, the thing about a general broad statement like that is that it's really hard to prove. If you've ever had discussions with religious people, you know that it's kind of like a shell game. If you say something like this, they'll say, well, that's not what it means. So for every vision, there is an equal and opposite revision, right? In 1916, Speaker Emmett Tompkins explained that people had the right to believe in the Bible as the inspired Word of God, but he said that belief should be based on reason, and that reason was dependent on evidence, on proof of facts. And then he got his audience to laugh at some of the absurdities in the Bible. In 1918, Mr. Hughes insisted that no religious belief or principle should be accepted that does not subject itself to the cold, impartial judgment of reason. Next, I'm coming to a slide about Olin Ross. And you might remember that Olin Ross is a rationalist, and that he was generally known for giving the church a very fair hearing. Let's see what he did. Ross said that all who believed in the supernatural world and paid homage to its mythical inhabitants and sought to communicate with them in any form were spook worshippers. He pointed out that these beings have not been proved to exist. He denied the existence of every one of these alleged beings, just as he denied the existence of ghosts, winged horses, talking snakes, and the like. Now, this sort of name-calling and poisoning the well, we might call it, is not really giving a rational reason for his conclusions. And maybe we'll want to discuss that a little bit more later about whether we think he lived up to his principles of rationalism there. In 1921, Marshall Goldman explained that the body is composed of millions of cells, which are constantly being destroyed and replaced. And Goldman declared that death was reaching the state wherein the body was unable to supply new cells to take the place of those that have been destroyed. He said, quote, life of the mind or the soul without the body was a fallacy, an impossibility. And he called the resurrection a myth. The headline says, quote, clergy branded as impertinent class. And in his presentation, Goldman accused the clergy of unfairly preying on people's interest in an afterlife. In 1916, the OSU biology professor William Barrows described evidence for the scientific conclusions about the origins of the solar system and humans. In 1918, Professor Samuel Sark said there were unmistakable proofs that people inhabited the earth for hundreds of thousands of years. Now, some of their name-calling that you just heard makes the new atheists seem nice. So our question is, how did people respond to the challenges of rational thinking and science? There's good news and bad news and good news. In 1923, a minister published a letter in the newspaper saying that the rationalists despise Christians. And if the rationalists have their way, music, law, government, literature, poetry, and would all disappear from society. And he also called them moral skunks who are poisoning the air. On the other hand, in 1916, rationalist president O.C. Weatherby said, and this is a big long quote, but it is a quote, we can witness the evolution of religion all around us. We can see our preachers now proclaiming, as only symbolical, those things that were once proclaimed as literally true. We see them accounting for the untruths and contradictions in their Bibles by explaining that the original language has been misinterpreted. We find them abridging the Ten Commandments and recognizing the rights of women, and now that religion has lost its power to command obedience, we find the churches beguiling young men and women by installing libraries of books that are true, introducing gymnasiums, motion picture machines, and the like. End quote. So it's apparent that Weatherby knows of some of the attempts to make more symbolic interpretations of Scripture, to not take things quite so literally, but still Weatherby would prefer to make reason, not revelation, the ultimate test of truth. And it should also be apparent that those changes and evolution in religion would not have occurred without challenges from courageous people. Oh, there you go. There's the slide for Mosley Weatherby, saying that religion is now unable to command obedience. Okay. The Rationalists also took time to celebrate free thought history. In 1924, they had a guest speaker from the Ohio Historical Society to tell about Ohio's history of allowing freedom of thought. Then, in 1916, the Rationalist Society began having annual Thomas Paine banquets to celebrate the anniversary of Thomas Paine's birth. Thomas Paine was born on January 29, 1737. Among the speakers at one of the Thomas Paine banquets was Mrs. Dora Sandell Bachman, who talked about Thomas Paine's pro-women suffrage philosophy. Bachman was the first woman to receive her law degree from the Ohio State University, and she was also the first woman to be on the Columbus Board of Education. Speakers for the Paine banquet also supported democracy and international law. Then, like Paine, they recognized the importance of building community. Many of the Thomas Paine banquets were held at the Hotel Fort Hayes, which used to be at 33 West Spring Street, where the Industrial Commission building is now. And also, this particular report is about a Thomas Paine banquet they had at the Southern Hotel. In 1920, at the Thomas Paine banquet, Rabbi Kornfeld explained that Paine has influenced all churches. He reminded them of Paine's suggestion to study the universe, not the Bible. Dr. Kornfeld even said that without Paine, Washington and Franklin might have been stood up against a stone wall and shot as traitors. Now, if you don't notice any other slide in this presentation, make sure to take note of this one. 300 at Paine Dinner of Rationalist Group. In 1927, the Thomas Paine banquet had 300 guests. This is more than twice what we've the number for any of our largest banquets. And that was the biggest year that I know of for the Rationalists. So our question is, what happened to the Rationalists? Where does such a big group go? The group canceled its annual banquet when its founder, Olin Ross, died in 1941. And that was the last newspaper entry I was able to find for the group. Apparently the Rationalists depended on Olin Ross and let the group die with him, but I don't really know. So what conclusions can we draw? What do we learn from history? The lives of people in Central Ohio have been improved by courageous thinkers. And in spite of that terrible metaphor that you should never let anybody say about herding cats, it is possible for free thinkers to organize and make valuable contributions to life in Central Ohio. Free thinkers stand for true American values like freedom, honesty, and courage. And we need to plan for our future.